Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. Jason, thank you for being with us today and engineering the broadcast. Rich Scheben's with us. No calls today, please. We've got a lot in the front of the classroom that we're going to be talking about. Rich Scheben, welcome.
Well, thank you, Vince. You know, it's amazing what's going on in America today. We're really when you listen to some of the articles I'm going to mention today, you will really think that these breaking news stories are coming out of third world banana republic countries. It's quite disturbing. But anyway, on a good note, it does come with some good news. Some governors and states are grabbing the bull by the horns and trying to control their destiny for their people, and Montana is one of these states. So how's everything down by you? Are you done with the cold spell and everything? Are you back into green grass?
Well, the snow is melting, and I expect we're going to have some flooding as a result of, the warm weather that we're going to have for a day or so. But since you mentioned cars, and this, believe it or not, this is going to put an exclamation point on what you've been saying for years. And I think it's time we say it. It really is. And it just tangentially touches cars. It doesn't touch lubrication and bearings and friction and miles per gallon. It doesn't touch any of that. Nothing about fixing cars, but it does relate to cars. And I believe that every single person in our broadcast classroom will know exactly what we are talking about when I go through this. You have mentioned many times a guy's name and his one of his best-known works, and that is the Twilight Zone. The man who created the Twilight Zone was born Rodman Edward Serling, without a T, S-E-R-L-I-N-G. He was born in 1924, the same year my dad was born, and my mom. And he died in 1975 at 50 years old. He was absolutely brilliant. And I have the entire series of the Twilight Zone, and I think it is beyond brilliant. Rod Serling, at the time, was the only writer to win 3 Emmy Awards. The only one. And his work was not the normal work. And class, if you'd like to view this, you can just type in Mike Wallace, Chris Wallace's dad, Mike Wallace, comma, Rod Serling, S-E-R-L-I-N-G. And there was an interview with Mike Wallace and Rod Serling called Interview with Colorful People. Now, I don't think they could use that term anymore. I don't think they could say the name of this broadcast television show is Interview with Colorful People. But that's what it was called. And Rod Serling answers some questions about censorship. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this has a direct tie to USA Prepares and what we do and the way we do it. And if you watch this interview yourself, it's on YouTube. It's about 21 minutes. You will see an incredible linkage between how we do what we do and Rod Serling and what he says in this interview. And I just saw it for the first time last night. So it's not like USA Prepares is based on it. It's just that we have come to the same place, we've come to the same conclusions at different times. But we both have said the same things. I'm talking about Rich Scheben, me, Rod Serling. So he was talking about censorship and how sponsors control a lot of what is said or not said over the airwaves and through the medium and media. So, for example, sponsors had him remove a Coca-Cola bottle from the set of one of his television features because it reminded, the sponsor said, it reminded people of Southern, the South. It had Southern connotations. I'm not sure what's wrong with that, but that's what the problem was. Then there's something called pre-censorship. Now, pre-censorship is when a writer stays away from areas that may cause trouble. Now, I interviewed a really famous guy, top 25 broadcaster in the early days of my broadcasting adventures, about 10 years ago. Real famous. One of the biggest of the big. And I said to him, do they ever tell you what you can and can't say? And he slammed his fist on the studio table. And he said, absolutely not. I know where the line is and I don't cross it. So that's pre-censorship. And I didn't know that word until yesterday, pre-censorship. Now I know what that means. Now, so who does that? Well, it's caused by the network, it's caused by the sponsors, and it's caused by what the audience does or doesn't want to hear. And you can think about that as the groups that, are voicing what they like and what they don't like Thomas Jefferson was a racist. The game Monopoly is racist because some of the properties in the game Monopoly are in the poorer section of town. And some are in the richer section of town. So it's a racist game, some say. I think it makes perfect sense to have a game like that. And you can learn a lot from it. You can learn about how greedy bankers are, and how greedy real estate owners are. Well, there was another show called Lassie, and Lassie had puppies. And the show was very well done. They didn't show the, the exact moment of birth and the blood and but it was very tastefully done. And this was a show that would show Lassie and the family, and so what happened next was a barrage of hate mail that came in to the network saying, if I wanted my kids to watch sex shows, I would have taken them to a burlesque show. That's what they said about Lassie and the puppies. So according to Rod Serling, this was a very well done, very tasteful piece, and this barrage of hate mail came in and caused the network to change its view. But what really happened was the cards and letters were in the same handwriting from the same postmark. How about that? Now, so the sponsors are there to push a product, and that's what Rod Serling says. But he also talked about something that I recommended and it's a video called Judgment at Nuremberg. It's about the after-war trial of some of the Nazi war criminals. And one of the actual pieces of audio related to VX gas that was used to kill people in the gas chambers. And the network sponsor had a problem with the use of the term VX gas. So that was taken out of the video. The audio was blanked out because the term VX gas would cause, in the sponsor's mind, the audience to have a problem with the new shiny gas appliances that they were promoting. I'm not kidding. Okay, so then there was Rod Serling talks about in this interview, there was a scene on a British ship. So a sailor calls down to the galley, and he asks for a pot of tea. A pot of tea. Gwyneth talks about tea. She makes a pot of tea before, coming on the broadcast. She mentions it, not every time, but she mentions plenty of times. Well, this sponsor had a problem with the word tea. Now think about that. How is that absolutely going to cause a problem anyway? Is it possible? Well, the reason that the sponsor had a problem with the word tea is because they were selling instant coffee. All right, so here's where all this ties to cars. So what I'm saying is, and what Rich has been saying, is the media is controlled. I'm not talking about USA Prepares. I'm not talking about Genesis Communications. USA Prepares has no sponsors. I don't care, as long as we are professional, and as long as we don't use profanity, and as long as we speak the truth and eloquently, I'm all for it. So, with a few exceptions. But the Andy Griffith show, also called, I call it Andy of Mayberry, ran from 1960 to 1968. So if you notice in the Andy Griffith show, he rides around in a Ford Fairlane 500 or a Ford Galaxy. And every time a new Ford model came out, a new model year, he got one. And they were proud of it. And they let you know that it was a Ford. But in Rod Serling, he didn't do that with the Twilight Zone. He avoided all the brand names, and he didn't push the products the way other productions do. So what I'm saying is Rich Scheben has been absolutely, positively correct about the censorship, the control, the news we hear, the news we see, the news we read. He's been absolutely right on. And what I wanted to do with this few minutes of opening statement is that here's the proof. And it went all the way back to almost the beginning of television. I'm talking the late 1950s and 1960 for Andy of Mayberry. Rich, I know you've got a bunch of comments about what I just said.
Oh, yeah, and we've proved this many times. I mean, it's not a left-right paradigm. It's really a totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist, corrupt, tyrannical, communist insurrection takeover that we're seeing right now. That's why 200 million Americans can't come up with $1,000 for an emergency payment, because they want to basically use those people for future brown shirts or future... See, when you were talking about products in your opening statement, they're not selling products much anymore. They're selling narratives. We are the product. We are the product. That's why they want to use... That's why we're hearing so much about increased genocide, eugenics, wars. I mean, Biden's gotten us into 3 wars right now. All these new divide and conquer strategies, infighting, chaos for many of the agenda, like forced depopulation. We've talked about all this. That's why we are at the lowest of the low of the lowest in consumer confidence and trust in the system right now, because people can see where the economy is going, the phony commerce, the phony stock market. I mean, we don't have price discovery. We don't have fundamentals, PE ratios, price to sales ratios, everything. I've given many what I call economic 101 updates over the years. Nothing matters anymore, including the definitions. I've talked about the derivatives market now in the quadrillions. There's no future prosperity or opportunity. What we're seeing is a consolidation of power, money, and control, and we are the product. When you don't have advancement for merit, and it's only based on what group you're in, basically, if you want to be part of a generic group, you have to be willing to snitch and tattletale and sell out your fellow Americans. Excuse me a minute. I had a little cereal half an hour ago. I just got to get some water. Okay. So this is the world that we live in, and we have to realize that we are the product. And that's why we spend a lot of times also on ideas and solutions. Like, for example, right now, I'm going to start my seeds. I make sure I get open pollinated and heirloom seeds. I first germinate my seeds next to my wood cook stove, so they germinate, then I put them outside. Well, not outside, but in my solarium where I heat with convection from my cabin. Okay? These are the things that we need to do to become more self-sufficient. You've heard me talk many times about food, water, shelter, and energy, building skill sets, being self-sufficient because of what's coming. This is where we have to go. We'll be right back after this break, folks.
Class, very quickly, this week's schedule, of course, is rich today. Gwyneth will be on with us for an hour tomorrow. The second hour, it'll be me and tips from the book. Thursday, we've got a really interesting broadcast. Kathy's going to be with me for 2 hours. And we're going to be talking about houses and what we would change if we were building again. What would we do differently? What would make it better? And actually, some of the things we've already done and incorporated in our homes, we wanted to share that with you. Then on Friday, hour number 1 is me, hour number 2 is Bert. Rich, back to you.
Well, thank you, Vince. Speaking of houses, I want to mention something, and I don't have any ties, no financial ties. He doesn't owe me any favors. It's just a guy who is like several of these builders here in western Montana. Remember I talked about this guy who builds out of barns, out of a huge barn and builds year-round. He builds everything from garages to barns to guest cabins to sheds. He has a robotic machine with a flatbed that can go in every direction and deliver up to 40-foot buildings. Okay, my log cabin is 40 foot long, 30 by 40, just so you know. He built a garage for me a few years ago, 24 foot long, for $6,700. The reason why I'm mentioning this, and I'm going to give you his name and number, it's Kaufman Builders. He's got a salesman. His name is Jason Kaufman. His phone number here in Northwest Montana is 406-291-5875. Again, 406-291-5875. Kaufman Builders. I'm sure he's online. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because, and Vince, you just reminded me when you said the word building and housing and doing it all over again, a lot of people are rushing. Contractors are not a dime a dozen like you think. I recommend building like a little guest cabin on a property you're going to buy and live in that for the first year. Insulate it yourself. Put in a wood stove. Put in a water tank up in the loft, do gravity feed, and you're living, okay? And it turns into a guest cabin or a storage bin or whatever. It's going to have use and it's going to have value to your land. Right now, the average 20-acre property in this neck of the woods here in Northwest Montana is probably, my realtor said, shooting from the hip, without a structure on it, without a house on it. The average 20-acre property is about $160,000 in this neck of the woods. I have a friend who just, from the Flathead, bought 5 acres, no structure, for $185,000. Now, prices fluctuate. They're all different because people, and there wasn't even a tree on this property. I think he personally it's overvalued for what he paid for it, but hey, everything is in the eye of the beholder. So if you can find 20 acres in Northwest Montana for under $160,000, buy it. And if you're young, try to get as far out into the sticks as you possibly can. Now, I'm seeing people show up. If you have a fifth wheel, if you have an RV, you have a camper, especially because of seasonality as we're pulling out of winter. I just looked at the 10-day forecast. We're going to be in the 30s and 40s for highs. What I'm seeing a lot of people doing when I drive by their place, and people, they contact me because they either read my book or heard me on the air or whatever, they are basically getting a little guest cabin built or bringing in their camper, RV, or fifth wheel, living in that, and they're doing it smart. They're putting in their raised beds. They're putting in soil. They're getting ready to start their garden in the spring, and then they're going to put their greenhouse up, and then the last thing they do before they plant is put up their garden fence. So you can get machinery to your raised beds, bring in whatever tools you need, whatever fencing you need, whatever, the raised bed materials, the greenhouse materials, and you could bring it in with a machine of sorts and not have to just worry about bringing it through the gate because you built your garden fence first. So just little tips of the trade, but I really recommend, folks, the way things are going with land, because there's such a mass exodus out of the cities. We all know it's a seller's market. It's especially a seller's market in rural America, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. It's because people can see what's coming. And I'm going to talk about some of those articles today, too. People see the units of measure of despair going up, lack of nutrition in foods, suicide, homicide, contaminated water, people living like rats on top of each other. I mean, all the drug overdose use. And I'm not just talking street drugs. I'm talking pharmaceutical drugs, too. Like Dr. Shealy says, the third leading cause of death in America is the American medical system. So when we come back, folks, I knew this was a short segment. I'm going to just start with news, if it's okay with you, Vince. And we're just going to whip out as much news and information as possible.
Rich Scheben's with us. How apropos, during the bottom of the hour news, you heard about Facebook shutting down a sheriff's web page, or a page for Facebook on that the sheriff's office had. And so we talked about how the media controls, sponsors control, and you just heard it. You just heard it just a couple minutes ago. Let's have a quick comment, and before we continue with the news, Rich. Arjun wrote me an email, and he is interested in property at about $1,200 an acre, and I wrote back to him that you can't do it anymore. You know, we tried that for a couple of years. The properties are now gone. And what it would have required was buying, 640 acres, which is called a section or a square section, 1 square mile, and dividing it up and selling it. And we could have done it for about $1,200 to $1,500 an acre. But that's because we'd buy a square mile of it. But there was so little interest that it didn't work. So we tried it again and again, and it still didn't work. Now the property's been all cut over. It's worthless because all the timber's been cut off it. And the other properties that we could have gotten 100 to 200 acres, they've gone up in price, or they've been already sold. So we can't do it anymore. And why would we be able to do it back then and not now? Because we were ahead of the curve. Because we saw this before others saw it. Now other people are buying or have bought the property and driven the price up. Any comments about that? Because I did tell Arjun we would mention this and discuss it a little bit.
Yeah, Vince, first of all, the unit of measure being used for years and years ago of per acre price, forget about it, okay? That's a thing of the past, okay? It just doesn't, it's like saying the word swell. You hear it once in a while, but it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, I know it has a meaning, but it's not a real world word because everything has been subdivided. The subdivision regs, that's one of the reasons for inflation in home prices or in land, is because they only make a certain amount of land. So much of it has been subdivided. The subdivision regulations have become so much more strict with engineering roads and culverts. Easements is a big issue. If here in this neck of the woods, if you don't have a 60-foot easement going to your property, forget about subdividing it. Forget about it. Don't even look into it. It isn't going to happen. Then there's perk test, and you got to put in a well. Then if you take out a loan and don't buy cash, you have to do everything to code. This is why I tell everybody, buy rural property as far back in the bush as you can get, because 5 years from now, it won't be rural. I mean, there's new technology. The flying car technology is out there. Just the elite don't want to put it out there because they feel that their lifestyle is going to be so much greater. It's going to really make it look like the inequality is so obvious. But there's things that the little guy can do. You can buy a UTV, which is a side-by-side. You can get a hard top or a soft top, and you can exchange what they call tracks for the existing tires. And I know people who have them. It works wonderfully. And what that does is if you're living out in the bush, you never have to plow again because this UTV with tracks literally goes over the snow. And then you park your car somewhere at a friend's house, maybe rent a little piece of land, maybe buy a little lot, and put your car, your vehicle, your truck on the pavement where they plow. It's not that hard. Remember, I say think outside the box, live outside the box, and stop talking outside the box. You have to have a plan. I know so many people. When I bought my first house in Missoula, I think I was 29, so it had to have been 89. It's pretty easy math because I was born in 1960. I remember half of my friends were saying, "Oh, you're an idiot. I can't believe it. You bought a..." Well, all it did was go up. When I sold my house like 16 years ago, I sold it for $305. Right now, that same house is probably in that $700,000 range in Missoula, Montana. Okay? Prices don't go up because taxes go up and inflation goes up. The powers that be, a little deflation is good for the little guy, but the powers that be do not want that. They don't want anything good for the little guy. They want you underneath their thumb. They have an addiction to power, money, and control, and they want to consolidate power, money, and control with this official. That's why, when you hear the word experts or official authority, it doesn't mean anything. Governments, corporations, they've sold us out. There's no more voting legitimacy. There's no more DOJ, FBI, CIA, academia, bankers, politicians, installed elections at the highest level, health care, everything to do with courts, judges, lawyers, elections, everything's in question. Everything's fraud. Even our own military, with all the election fraud and all the foreign interference of evidence that's out there, our own military doesn't even adhere to their oath and duty now. They should have stepped in a long time ago. Just yesterday, our Supreme Court says they refuse to look at election fraud. This is why Governor Gianforte, you need to invite all these people, the Powells, the Mike Lindells, the Mayor Giuliani's, and let's have an actual hearing here in Montana. See, this is why that they want to. That's part of the agenda, is to eliminate free speech, free markets of supply, forced austerity on the people, no representation for the little guy, delegitimization of work, crashing everything, centralized government-created cryptocurrency, which has nothing to do with economics, eliminate peaceful assembly. We talk about this all the time. Depopulation, eliminate free speech, food shortages and starvation, forced vaccines to kill our immune system, immunity passports, forced lockdowns, with 5G towers destroying us, divide and conquer strategies. So basically the useful idiots, as the elite call a lot of people, they subconsciously make you stick up for your group, your hyphen, and your pronoun, and not your country. I mean, here, the Democrats work with White House to plan to crack down on dissent and eliminate First Amendment rights. This is an article. Next one here, government Biden AG pick. Merrill Garland says he'd support working with Congress to restrict free speech. How do you expect to get, when they're openly destroying free speech, how do you expect to get the truth, people? It's not going to happen. That's why government confidence and trust in the system is non-existent. We no longer have meritocracy for advancement. It's gone. That's why what we're seeing is a Bolshevik, Alinsky, Cloward and Piven, Marxist, totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist, corrupt, tyrannical, communist insurrection in front of our eyes. I know that was a mouthful, but that's exactly what we're seeing. So, Vince, what I'd like to do is go into more news, if that's okay with you.
You bet. I'm just going to sit back and relax for the next hour and 18 minutes.
Well, I thank you, sir, and I thank you for letting me exercise my First Amendment rights, which over 1 million combat soldiers gave their life for our freedom, our liberty, our rule of law. It's a shame to see what's happening in America today. Next, Biden's insane executive offer on climate change gives China access to the U.S. grid. Next, global bombshell. Department of Energy blocked Texas from increasing power output before and during the deadly storm. Now, when I was talking about land a moment ago, and Vince touched on it, regarding ideas and solutions, people, if you have a smart meter, the powers that be, if they have insiders inside the Department of Energy blocking Texas that has their own grid, that's not attached to the lower 48, they have their own grid, where dozens of people died because of this. And no accountability, of course. There's some plausible deniability in every direction you go in. Why do you want to live on the grid when the powers that be, including the article I mentioned 2 articles ago about China having access to the U.S. grid? All this stuff can be hacked, people. All of it. Why do you want to put yourself in that position? I'll tell you right now, it's going to get to the point where people living off-grid, their property is going to be worth 100 times more than people living on the grid. Whether it be for hacking or privacy, less cost. Do you know, I read articles, people, where some people were getting, in Texas, was getting $17,000 bills for their energy bills, for their bill. Wrap your head around that, folks. 95% of Americans can't come up with that money. Next. This should raise serious red flags. CNN and NBC paid Black Lives Matter leader John Sullivan $35,000 apiece for U.S. Capitol riot. What does that come to? $70,000, $35,000 apiece. And they're banning all this information on the Facebooks of the world, on the Twitters of the world. Even though there's leaked audio that has surfaced of John Sullivan admitting Antifa and BLM, a.k.a. Blantifa, were involved in the Capitol siege. See, just like the Mueller trial, just like the P dossier, just like Russia. It doesn't matter, folks. They just make stuff up, and you pay for it through taxes and inflation. This is the 1984 Orwellian world we live in. This is why you always hear me talk about the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody, and then truth, and if somebody has less consequences for their behavior because of what group they come from, you get to do it too. This is what happens when we go for decades of basically seeing all these consequences of inaction towards political correctness. This is what happens when we don't say anything. This is what happens when we allow certain groups to demand to lower the bars of standards and expectations for a job. Where hard work, proven results, and qualifications, what happens? This is what happens when certain groups are dubbed to demand to lower the bars of standards because they have victim group status, which is nothing more than an insult to their work ethic, their intelligence, and everything else. When you demand that the people who were targeted get no protection, rights, or restitution under the law, and you give runaway unchecked power to these elite groups in government and big corporations, pretty soon when they come after you, there's no one there to help you. When you enable and protect the most corrupt companies in the world and the country and give them liability immunity, you see more wealth inequality, and people are afraid to stand up because they're afraid to be called a racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe. In other words, an anti-Islamist phobe. This is what happens when we give free lunch to the elite. This is what happens when you eliminate the rule of law for precedence. This is what happens when we allow hypocrisy and double standards and brainwashing, which we've given countless articles to prove over the years, and people say nothing. This is what happens when you're being biologically, chemically, and technologically and psychologically neutered. We'll be right back, folks.
Rich Scheben's with us. Rich, please continue.
Well, thank you, sir. Next article. Psaki says coal and natural gas, not frozen wind turbines, cause power grid failure in Texas. We cannot... When you get this stupid, when you think the American people will buy every narrative that you throw out, then there's no hope in America when Americans who aren't stupid are afraid to speak up. It's because I just mentioned, it's because the Department of Energy, these are all published articles in the public domain, folks. I don't make this stuff up. The Department of Energy blocked Texas from increasing power output before and during this Arctic blast. What else? What do you think is going to happen, too, when Biden gives an executive order which gives China access to the U.S. grid? Think about it. Don't you think there's a progression here? Connect the dots. Why do you think you're on smart meters? So they can see when you're home, what appliances you're using, how if they want you to have a certain behavior, they'll just cut off your power if you don't do it. Can you see what's going on here, people? Next, Joe Biden suggests blacks and Hispanics are too stupid. I read this article. He really did say this, people. You can't even make this stuff up. He suggested that blacks and Hispanics can't figure out how to get online. That's in quotes. I'm not kidding you. Do you remember when Ilhan Omar, I mentioned this on the air before, said Hispanics can't compete in a merit-based system? Can't you see this is not a left-right paradigm? This is the wealthiest of the wealthiest who have bribed and blackmailed their lieutenants, like a Joe Biden, in order to eliminate our freedoms, our rights, and create a totalitarian, authoritarian, corrupt, tyrannical communist insurrection that's fascist. I know it's a mouthful, but that's exactly what's happened. We've given tons of proof and articles showing it. That's why I like math. That's why I like trends. That's why I use objective facts. And I don't use subjective emotional opinions and speculation and hearsay and rumors and gossip and second and third and fourth-hand information. That's called Russia, Russia, Russia. That's called the Mueller trial. That's called the P dossier. And you're paying for it all. Next, Facebook bans Australian users from viewing news articles. You think it has anything to do? I wonder if India is going to be next in South Africa because they're stopping the vaccinations. Or maybe Australia has too many. I've read a lot of negative articles about Bill Gates. You know who he is? He's the guy that's been kicked out of many countries for all these vaccinations that have killed people and maimed people. You know that guy, the biggest proponent of vaccines, who's also the biggest proponent of a major depopulation. You know that guy. Not to mention the fact that Merck also said vaccines don't work. Oops. Next, Orwellian. YouTube censors all videos from an academic conference on the dangers of censorship. You can't even make this stuff up. Even the articles are getting stupid because they seem unbelievable. Next, there's Bill Gates applauds the world's worst polluter, China, for making climate a priority, unquote. I mean, it's getting to the point that these elite people think that we are so dumb. This is why I've given so many thousands of articles and proof to show that we're being distracted, dumbed down, and divided by groups. Are people waking up? Absolutely. But when you get to the point where our intelligence agencies, law enforcement, military, judges, lawyers, courts, politicians, bankers, our own Supreme Court is against the people, all I can say is, wow. The word official authority and experts has been totally devalued. Next, under Biden, military begins purging of all conservatives. See, this is why I don't like this liberal conservative, because it's not a left-right paradigm. What is really about conservatives is the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's the rule of law. It's freedom. It's liberty. It's justice. And they're calling those people, over 1 million combat soldiers who got killed for our rights and freedoms and liberties, and they're purging them? That's code. Let me decode that for you. That means they're looking for brown shirts. They're looking for anybody who would do anything for money. That's called mercenaries. The military gives their oath, gives their word, their duty, their honor for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. What happened? Where did we go? We'll be right back with some more news after the hard break at the top of the hour. We appreciate you being here, everybody. Thank you.
Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Scheben's with us. Rich, just to revisit Rod Serling for just a few seconds. Rod Serling admitted that in the 1950s, late 1950s, he was hired to write letters, testimonial letters for products so that marketeers could hype and sell more products to the unsuspecting. Now, he didn't say it exactly that way, but I believe that's what he meant. And that's what's happening today. You have been mentioning many, many different ways about how we, the villagers, are being manipulated. And 62 years ago, Rod Serling said exactly that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they go about it. It's often through subliminal messaging. It's professional wordsmithing. It could be Hegelian dialectic, media propaganda. The powers that be has propaganda, hoaxes, false flags, and lies coming from every direction. It's just like when we were talking about Texas and the power grid. You know, the Biden Department of Energy forced the grid to go below 60% of capacity in order to meet these arbitrary green emissions targets. And you got to keep in mind, folks, you know, they want EV, you know, electric vehicles. to have the solar panels that the left says we need for energy, we have to have a mass die-off in the billions. There isn't enough silver to man all this. Now, we all know that silver, whether it be naked shorts or many different ways, is the most attacked commodity. Force of silver's a money, a commodity. It's an investment, and it's used in everything. Okay, from cell phones to your computer to EVs to solar panels, water purification. We talked about all this before in the past. There isn't enough. I mean, with what they want to use just for solar and EVs, silver should be at $1,500 an ounce right now. But see, common sense and logic doesn't make true value because we have so much corruption, manipulation, and manufactured illusions for price. And when I talk about naked shorts, people always use the term paper contracts. It really should be electric contracts these days. We literally have supply running out. We have leverage at 250 to 1. We have major shortage supply problems. So we need to, how can we have this green agenda when we don't even have the silver for it? This is what's happening. Okay, let me move on here. Equality Act to end legal recognition of biological sex. Joe Biden is creating this Equality Act. It's got a lot of issues. We don't have time to talk about it all. But now, forget about women in sports. I mean, are they going to say that, women can be raped? Are they going to say you can't say the word women, boy, girl, brother, sister? See, there's not going to be any laws left. They want infighting. They want corruption. They want murder. They want suicide. They want homicide. They want drug use. That's why a lot of these states, like Oregon, almost every deadly drug is legal there. This is not by accident, folks. It's not for your leisure and hospitality industry. Trust me. Next, Biden begins releasing 25,000 illegals into U.S. cities. Well, we've talked about this, the UN agenda. They want to bring in the next 25 years 3, 4, 5, 600 million people into the U.S. That's what they do. They break countries. And then pretty soon we're in a world government, and forget about freedom, forget about liberty, and there's going to be mass die-off. And I don't mean to be harsh or morbid, but that's exactly what's happening. When you bring in people who are unvetted for crimes, unvetted for drug use, unvetted for skill sets, unvetted for anything, there's nothing good that can come from it. It just enforces and quickens the consolidation of power, money, and control for the elite. Next, school board members caught mocking parents over lockdown. They thought their Zoom call was private, and the school board members who you put in are mocking the parents of the children. How many times have we said, Vince and I, to homeschool your kids? Get them out of the government public school arena. It's political and social indoctrination. Teaching little boys to give BJs, telling little kids who are confused already that they can choose their gender, not listen to their parents, go get an abortion without the parents' approval, but you need a permission slip for a class trip. Think about that, people. Get your kids out of the public government schools. Next, smoking gun. New classified documents prove the Democrats broke the law to investigate President Trump. Yeah, but what's going to happen? If all of our judges and our lawyers in courts are bought and paid for and blackmailed, what the heck's going to happen? Nothing. Next, Poland will fine big tech $13.5 million per case for removing ideological content because Poland spent 45 years under communism and they don't want to go back. So is Poland going to be the new America? See, this is what happens when we don't speak up, people. We're reaping the consequences of decades of inaction towards political correctness. There's many subsets under political correctness, probably at least 1,000. The number one is the antonym of truth. Please keep that in mind. Next, West Virginia County becomes Second Amendment sanctuary. See, here's some good news here with some states. Next article, Camden County becomes Missouri's first Second Amendment sanctuary county. I think it's up to 3 now since I gleaned this article. Here's good old Montana becomes 18th state to abolish concealed carry permit requirement. And Montana also considers domestic terror designation for Antifa. And last week, Governor Gianforte got rid of the mask mandate, which North Dakota is doing as well. Governor Gianforte, you better be careful. You keep up at this pace. In fact, heck, you've already done in 1 month more than our last governor who was in there for 8 years. So Governor Gianforte, thank you. If you keep doing this, you're going to be labeled as a Montana hero. You better be careful. And I'm proud to be a Montanan with a governor like we have with Greg Gianforte. Next, North Dakota taking steps to nullify all of Joe Biden's unconstitutional laws and executive orders. Now, we've talked, and North Dakota is also getting rid of the mask mandate. And we've talked about the Denmark study where it does no good, the New England Journal of Medicine study where they say wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers little, if any, protection. In many cases, the desire for the widespread masking is a reflective action or reaction to anxiety over the pandemic. We've talked about how dentists now are coming out with 50% of their patients having gum disease, which the bacteria in the mouth is the most dangerous, which is associated with heart attacks and strokes. We've talked with Dr. Norm Shealy about all this. This is all facts, all published in the public domain. Okay. Next. This is sick. Joe Biden excuses the Uyghur genocide just as labeling it as a cultural norm for the Chinese, and they're saying it's spreading CCC propaganda. Remember at the beginning of the broadcast, I talked about increasing genocide, eugenics, wars, divide and conquer strategies, infighting chaos, forced depopulation. It's because we mention these articles, folks. This isn't, I don't give subjective emotional opinion. I give objective facts based on published articles in the public domain. I look at trends. I look at math. That's the articles I use. I mean, because I have such little time, I have to shortcut everything I say and mention it as quickly as possible. Next article. Love the title. Ignored by media, dirtbag Joe Biden says U.S. veterans and former police officers are fueling white supremacism in America. No, we don't. If you ever listen to some of the things that we say here, we judge people by hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications, ability to help others, the pick factor, which I labeled as patriotism, intelligence, and courage. That's the kind of things that we judge on USA Prepares. And everybody I know, I don't know any white supremacist. This is all BS to sell the narrative, to create race wars, more division, more divide and conquer strategies, and keep the eye off the ball and hide all the crimes that the elite, authoritarian, totalitarian left is doing. Next. Bill Gates, bankrolling educational organization that says math is racist. There you go. Keep demanding to lower the bars of standards and expectations for anything. A job, that means math is bought and paid for. Science is bought and paid for. The rule of law is bought and paid for. Our military is bought and paid for. Merit, hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications now mean nothing. Zippo, nada. Next. Crime wave video. Merrick Garland says Antifa attacks on courthouses aren't domestic terrorism. Please sit down. Please sit down for this last short sentence. Antifa terrorism is not true domestic terrorism because they happened at night. Yes, that pause was for effect. It's surreal. It's unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. Next, New Mexico Governor Grisham was caught. This is not just for you people in New Mexico. This is the American people should be kicking this person out of office. Governor Grisham in New Mexico was caught using taxpayer money to pay for her groceries, her tequila, and her whiskey. How is she still in office, people? Really? I mean, when you can be part of a certain group and get away with anything, it illegitimizes our country. Next. Kansas bill would make gold and silver legal tender in the state. Well, every state should have a bill. I think Utah has a bill. I think every state should have that. We have to. The little people does not have representation. That means we don't have a plan B if the crapper hits the fan when these people at the top print money like a bunch of drunken sailors. In fact, I think the drunken sailors are jealous of the behavior of the so-called money changers. Next, we are turning into a version of a totalitarian state, says a liberal author, Naomi Wolf, because she's knocking lockdowns with Tucker Carlson. This is supposed to be a liberal author. People, we better wake up and we better do something about it fast, or we will not have in America. We're about to be taken over, and it's not going to be pretty. Speak up. Don't let political correctness and your willingness to be liked stop you from telling the truth. We'll be right back. Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, I mentioned earlier in the broadcast on how the Supreme Court refuses to review any of the Pennsylvania and the so-called swing states. And it's more than swing states. It's Virginia, it's California, it's New Mexico, it's Minnesota, it's the voter fraud. I mean, I know myself, I gave it minimum of 1,200 pieces of objective facts and evidence over the past 3 months of voter fraud and foreign intervention. So you can give all the information and evidence you want. But see, when the certain powers that be aren't doing their job, they're not willing to do their job, they're not willing to put their country, like the Supreme Court, before themselves. That's what you get. That's the problem. Now, it's not for all the Supreme Court. I know Alito, I think Gorsuch, also Thomas, Justice Thomas. You are always welcome by my fire. I think you should run for president, sir. I want to thank you for being a patriotic American and sticking up for the rule of law. Looks like everybody else is bought and paid for or blackmailed. What a shame. Those of you outside of the three I just mentioned, you should take off your robes and just go home because you're a disgrace to the American people, to the American flag. You are spitting on the graves of over 1 million combat soldiers who gave their life at an early age for our freedoms and liberties. You're a disgrace. You're cowards. You're turncoats. I think you should just take your robes off and go home, please. So let's talk about this subject since we're on it. Virginia, now starting another garbage audit. More theater, using a 1980 audit program to catch 2020 voter fraud. Not making this stuff up, folks. Again, they're all published information in the public domain. Next, Michigan removed 177,000 voters from voter rolls in January after certifying those votes for a Biden win by 154,000 votes. People, we are living in a clown world. We are literally living where the people at the top of our institutions are all illegitimate, all bought and paid for, all blackmailed. They have literally thrown the American people under the bus. Next, Trump attorney. 2 trailers full of completed ballots were delivered to Pennsylvania from New York, one on November 4th. Oh, don't worry, Kavanaugh, you gang rapist, or Amy Barrett, you brag about your Catholicism and Catholic faith and all those other people there. You're so high and mighty. But there's all this evidence that we've talked about for months, and you're saying you refuse to look at it. Next, Democrats push bill that forces all states to count ballots received 10 days after an election. Let me decode that bill for you people. That means the powers that be, or the Democrats, have sold out the American people for the elite money and power and fame and infamy and control. They're willing to pass bills to come up with X amount of ballots through fraudulent means to catch up to their Republican counterparts and win the race. That's what that bill means. That's the bill decoded. Next, another expert review of the Pennsylvania 2020 election results provides more evidence for suspected election fraud. And he says everything should be forensically reviewed, but even with subpoenas, which is supposed to be the rule of law, these states and these people aren't giving them up because they're bought and paid for and blackmailed. Keep throwing the American people under the bus. You guys are worthless. You're disgraceful. You're not even Americans. You're pathetic. Next, Pennsylvania is a mess. Tens of thousands of Pennsylvania ballots were returned before they were sent out. You can't even make this stuff up, people. Next, we have the evidence. Michigan radical Secretary of State sent absentee ballot application to a foreign student who attended college in Michigan for 4 years, returned to Taiwan in 2004, and her name and many more still remains in the database. You can't even make this stuff up.
Rich is on a roll. Rich, please continue.
Why, thank you, sir. This next article really shows how the elite are poisoning us against ourselves. Because a Virginia voter identified 1.7 million vote difference between the final state results in the 2020 election and external results reported on election night, something different. So, long story short, he went to address this issue with so-called official authorities. Again, I'm doing air quotes here. And no one would address his questions. 1.7 million vote difference. And no one would even bring it up. This is what happens when we allow the elite to poison us against ourselves. Whether they bribe or blackmail our so-called official authorities or so-called experts, nothing matters. Nothing matters. We are really heading into a Bolshevik, USSR, Nazi, totalitarian, fascist, tyrannical communist insurrection here. For those people, if there's anybody listening, and I don't think it's in this audience, but if there's anybody, folks, who you think is still a left-right paradigm, you need to educate these people. People who don't read and research are not American. We are at a point in history that people have to wake up and do something about it. Next article. We caught them. Matt Crane, critic of the Gateway Pundits. By the way, the Gateway Pundit, folks, it's not Gateway Pundit. It's the Gateway Pundit. Pundit is spelled P-U-N-D-I-T. They are a great, excellent source of truth. Anyway, going back to this article here regarding the 2020 election results in Colorado, they say it was not forthright because it turns out that this guy's wife worked for Dominion and Sequoia for over a decade. You can't even make this stuff up. So this individual, Matt Crane, he bragged about being this strong conservative and a very proud Republican, but obviously they were taking the money because his wife was working for the enemy for over 10 years. So he said this, instead of reaching out to the Gateway Pundit, he basically went to the state Republicans to disparage the Gateway Pundit's report to clear his name, even though it's all on email and all written down and all proof. This is what we have in America today, people. We have people who are willing to sell you out for anything. And I'm sure you heard about Mark Zuckerberg, switching gears a little bit. He was caught on tape, audio and video, talking about how we just don't know the long-term side effects about modifying people's DNA and RNA. I listened to the video. I have the quotes. It's all over the internet. So when people have double standards, hypocrisy, or stupidity, and they demand that you do a certain behavior, and they're the ones who are publicly proponents of it, but behind the doors they aren't, and this was caught by James O'Keefe, Project Veritas. I'll just read the quote here. I was paraphrasing. I share some caution on this vaccine because we just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA. He's part of the cabal that will not only want you to take it, but he's part of the cabal that wants depopulation. Yeah, he's trustworthy, right? Okay, next. Experimental mRNA vaccine caused 600 new cases of eye disorders and leave 5 people blind, according to the U.S. government. Well, how could Rich be a conspiracy theorist if this information is coming from the government? I want you to know, folks, that when you talk about side effects and adverse reactions, today, because of all the people who are bought and paid for, from what I'm researching, 1 out of 50 side effects and adverse events get reported. Now, I want you to read the side effect profile, the adverse event profile, and the contraindication profile on these package inserts for all drugs. Never mind vaccines. Remember, Dr. Shealy says when you go from, I'm going to paraphrase him, when you go from acute to chronic and you take a synthetic drug, pharmaceutical drug, for over 6 months, that drug is starting to kill you. Okay? Me and Dr. Shealy have talked about this in great detail. Dr. Shealy is an expert, practicing 60-plus years. He doesn't listen to theory. He goes by his practical experience. Okay? In other words, Dr. Shealy's not willing to be bought and paid for. He says the truth. He's an American with courage. He's the top of the line for the PIC effect: patriotism, intelligence, and courage. Next article. Wuhan Biolab to receive U.S. taxpayer funding through 2024. You can't make this stuff up, people. 600-plus pieces of evidence shows the Wuhan lab created the virus. But you remember when Joe Biden came in, the World Health Organization was putting out propaganda that it came from an animal? All they want to do is sell you the narrative, people. It has nothing to do with truth. It has everything to do with the agenda that I mentioned earlier in the broadcast and many times before. Next article. Hospitals are beginning to blame serious vaccine issues on the decreased patient's immune system. See, this is kind of like a Cuomo-ism here. Basically, hospitals who are taking money, not only for diagnosis of COVID, with PCR tests has been reamed up with the unit of measure up to 97%. The reason why they're going down dramatically is because the alternative media talked about this, and they've toned down the unit of measures, the variants. That's why there's less and less COVID being diagnosed. Is it a virus? Yes. But it's 1% virus, it's kind of a euphemism here, and 99% agenda. We know this. Next, woke insanity. Who would have thought, people, that there's a difference between wokeism and being awake? Whatever happened to common sense and logic and definitions? Who would have thought? Anyway, pardon my tangent here. Woke insanity is the name of this article. Hospitals tell women to stop using the term breastfeeding because it's offensive to transgenders, and they want you to use terms like chest feeding and things like that. Okay, this is where I need to mention my disclaimer again, because I know there's people out there that think I'm making these articles up. I just know it, because some of this stuff is so stupid, so tyrannical, so seditious, so willing to sell out the American people, so condescending to the American people. I bet there's people who think this can't be possible. Again, I promise you, pardon the redundancy, because some of these articles couldn't, I mean, they're almost comic relief. They think that you are so stupid. How condescending do the elite powers that be think that you are? Think about it. You can't say breastfeeding. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want you to say mother, father, wife, brother, sister, boy, girl. She said this publicly. I am not making this stuff up. This is where we are. It has nothing to do with the benefits of anybody. No one's a beneficiary of these behaviors than the elite. It's just like major inflation. Only the elite gets benefits, not the little people. Next. Government China's first. Well, America's no longer first. America's last policy is going on now. Biden's NIH authorizes Wuhan lab to receive taxpayer funding. Now, people, we all know the big pharma own the NIH, the CDC, the AMA, any school that physicians are in. It's all about the propaganda. When Rockefeller took over to get rid of any type of natural path, common sense medicine for the purpose of managing symptoms for profit and not curing using synthetic drugs. I promise you that is the way it is. They don't care about cures. They care about the profit, control, and now the agenda of depopulation. Next article. Speaking of, guess who? Bill Gates. Hey, people, for those of you listening, Bill Gates says you need to eat synthetic beef because it tastes like bean burgers. How do you like that, people? I mean, never mind the fact that you've had meat grown in laboratories, now bioreactors, red dye in meats. Non-meat's been growing in lab for I don't know how long, sold in restaurants and in grocery stores without being labeled that way. Steroids, hormones, antibiotics, GMOs, estrogen mimickers and everything. Pesticide-fed cattle, cloning livestock for the benefits of increased shelf life in stores and in the field. Modified proteins, enzymes, which affects your bioavailability, your absorption of nutrients, your excretion, your metabolism, your overall homeostasis in your body. Everything processed. Everything contaminated, tainted, poisoned, rigged. Compromised nutrition, cover-ups. This is what we deal with. And now Bill Gates is saying that you must eat 100% synthetic beef. Welcome to America. Is this any different than walking into a gas chamber, folks? Not much, is it? Next article. Dictator Fauci declares you can now hug your family members, but only if you've been vaccinated. Well, Vince, you can't hug your wife or your children. You need to be vaccinated. Next, genocide. People with learning disabilities are not resuscitated in England if they have symptoms of COVID-19. Well, everybody's going to have symptoms of COVID-19 because it's a cold, it's a flu. Is it real? Yes, it's real, but it's got a 99.7% survival rate. It's called genocide when they attack people with learning disabilities. When you look at all the people who have autism, all these Down syndromes. So now if they get sick and they go to the hospital, now these countries are saying that these people can't be resuscitated. That's called genocide. I've used the term genocide and eugenics and wars and divide and conquer strategies and infighting and chaos several times just in this broadcast with proof. And now there's an article about nicotine, and I read it the other day. I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's titled "How the Nicotine Gum and Patch are Scams." created and marketed by Big Pharma to keep you hooked on a deadly drug. You should see the side effects of this stuff. With a 94% failure rate after 6 months. You should read the side effects. It's truly unbelievable. Folks, we'll be back right after the break. We really appreciate you being here. Welcome back to the broadcast, everybody. Rich Scheben here, and it's the last segment of the day. We really appreciate you being here. Vince had to step away to finish up some chores. So, people often ask me, why do I do this? I've been offered by large production companies, very large production companies, to do documentaries, reality shows, and I kind of made, kind of friends with some of the people, and I talked to them on their private phone. They made it very clear I wasn't going to get final editing rights. They wanted me to sell the narrative, to demonize, discredit, delegitimize people who look with foresight, who are self-sufficient, things of that nature. And I decided I didn't want to take the money to sell out the American people, because I see everybody, any baby in the forest can see what's going on. But keep in mind how many times you've heard people say, oh, that'll never happen here in America. Oh, there'll be a civil war if that happens. Oh, they'll never take our guns. They'll never take our freedoms of liberty. They'll never poison our food. They'll never poison our water. They'll never bring in illegal, unvetted immigrants. They'll never do this. No, it's about equality, fairness, and tolerance, Rich, right? Is it really? With all the collusion, the racketeering, record bonuses for corporations and banks who get bailouts on the same year, harvesting baby parts in the open, normalizing pedophilia in the open, hate hoaxes being a sport, teaching kids in school to change their gender, eliminate proven results and qualifications for getting a job in lieu of what group you're in, poisoning our food, water, medications, eliminating free speech, hypocrisy and double standards being the norm based on what group you're in again, installing politicians at the highest levels, eliminating your voice and your vote, even creating bills to legalize voter fraud, no more rule of law. And here's a good one. How about all these white males, like the Zuckerbergs and the Gates and the Bezos and the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Clintons, all these people, calling poor and middle-class white males racist and white supremacists when the people who are creating the narrative have it all, have theirs, but don't want you to even survive, and demands and orders from all these elitists that brag about their success when they didn't even get there, mostly because of their daddy, in some cases their mommy, or in some cases the CIA and intelligence agencies to sell out the American people. Most of these people, even on mainstream media, were put on third base and brag about hitting a home run. Oh, tyranny will never come here. Communism, Marxism, authoritarianism, fascism, that'll never happen in America, Rich. It's happening because we're seeing and living and reaping the consequences of decades of inaction towards political correctness. What we've done is we've supported the ruling class, the traitors, the cowards, and the followers, and we've given free lunch to the elite by eliminating the rule of law with precedents and giving them liability immunity. At the same time, they are literally taking all the money and survival ability from the bottom 93% and giving it to the top 1% to 2%. And they give us divide and conquer strategies in return, where the useful idiots, as they call you, only care about your group, your hyphen, your pronoun, and don't look at the bottom line, which is the standards of what America used to be for getting a job. We are living a pill. We're taking pills of cognitive dissonance, and our humanity in America is devolving into stupid. When a lie reaches its full potential, and you ask questions to investigate, to verify it, and telling the truth becomes illegal, that's when you know America is too corrupt and manipulated to exist. We are letting the manufactured perception and illusions point us in the wrong direction. They want us to have submissive conformity, which leads to despair and division and the elimination of our rights, liberties, and freedoms. Now, I didn't have time, and then I think I have seconds now, but one of the commercials earlier in the broadcast, they were talking about climate change, global warming and all this stuff. Well, I just want to read some chronological headlines from years ago until the break comes. 1967, Salt Lake Tribune. Dire famine forecast by 1975. Already too late. 1974, Time Magazine, another ice age, telling signs everywhere. 1988, Agence France Presse, Maldives will be completely underwater in 30 years. 2004, The Guardian, the Pentagon tells Bush climate change will destroy us. Britain will be Siberia in less than 20 years. We have to think for ourselves. Don't listen to anything we say. Verify, people. Verify. We appreciate you being here today. You all have a great day. Thank you, America.